He'd thought about punching a Shilvetai. Who hadn't? Not only had the aliens conquered Earth with almost trivial ease, the 7-foot purple Amazons also had the audacity to start running the planet better than humanity ever had. Homelessness was down across the board. Cancer was a thing of the past. Global warming? Forget about it. Sure, there were hotspots across the world where the resistance was still fighting the good fight, but for most ordinary folks living in the cities, life was much improved. With that in mind, out of a mix of good old American freedom-loving outrage and sheer human doggedness, Jason had occasionally considered planting a good right hook into the stupid smug face of the Imperial Marine who manned the checkpoint he passed each day on his way to university. He thought about it in much the same way a person might occasionally consider tripping a passing jogger or nudging their car up onto the curb. An errant what-if that they'd never really act upon. Which was why he was so surprised as he watched a video of himself brawling with an off-duty Shilvetai that a small crowd of enthusiastic humans cheering in the bar behind them as he went blow for blow with the massive alien. The video was helpfully titled, "Drunk Dude PWNS Perp," and Jason was equally alarmed to note that it had already received 12 million views. Suddenly his hangover didn't seem quite so pressing as he glanced up from the Omni slate to the imposing figure of the Shilvetai Marine holding it. "I believe we have something to talk about," she said in her native language, her tusked maw formed into a predatory grin as she loomed in the doorway of his apartment. "Why yes, I think we do," he responded in passable Shilvetai, slowly lowering the melting bag of ice he'd had pressed to his head when he opened the door. "Do you want to come in?" She nodded, stepping inside as she reattached the Omnipad back to her belt. Jason watched her go before turning to shut the door, glancing around to make sure no one had seen her come in. The last thing he needed to do was get labeled as a perp lover. The war was only 6 years ago, and while the aliens themselves might have been pretty safe from human retaliation around here, those humans who were seen to be too close to them definitely weren't. "So," he said, turning to the alien who was shamelessly looking around his apartment. "How much trouble am I in?" He was too hungover to dance around the subject, so he figured it was better to just rip the band-aid off now. Whatever happened next wasn't going to be fun, but given that he'd been woken up by a single alien knocking on his door, rather than an Imperial strike team knocking it down, he figured at the very least he'd be getting out of this alive. "How very forward." The alien smiled, the black scara of her eyes settling on him. "I suppose I should have expected as much from the human who had the tits to knock one of his sisters on her ass." Jason deliberately ignored the odd turn of phrase. It was usually indicative of how long one of the aliens had been on the planet by how many native phrases they picked up and mangled. "Is she, okay?" The Marine waved a hand dismissively. "A few bruises and a small concussion. I imagine the greatest injury will be to her pride. Not just from her loss, but from the endless ribbing she will receive from her squad mates about being laid low by a human of all things, and a male one at that. You do realize we're, traditionally, the bigger gender down here, right? Unlike most of the rest of the galaxy, apparently. We do, oddity that your species is, but cultural expectations and factual realities seldom go hand in hand." She smiled. "One need only look at those of your kin who continue to fight us to see that." The insinuation was as subtle as a brick. "I'm not a dissident," he said, even as he fought to keep his already pounding heart from going into overdrive. "I'm an engineering student who lives in a crappy inner-city apartment, not a nut job with a rifle and the naive assumption that taking the occasional potshot at passing patrols is going to do anything beyond get me bombed from orbit." "Does it matter?" she asked. "Whatever feelings you have on the matter, you were caught on video knocking out a member of the Shilvetai military. Intentional or not, in the eyes of my superiors you're a rebel who is fomenting dissent." Jason groaned, feeling the life he'd been working toward slipping through his fingers. "I don't even remember it happening. Hell, I don't even know how it started." "Truly?" The perp cocked her head to the right slightly, the Shilvetai equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "According to a number of sources, including the soldier in question, you strode up to her and demanded a duel for the pride of humanity. He blanched. The soldier in question claimed to be more amused than anything else and accepted in return for a date when she won. He double blanched. Yeah, he could see that happening. Perp Marines were renowned for being three things: big, mean, and thirsty. Essentially the gender-flipped version of human Marines. They also seemed to regard scoring with humans in much the same way a man might have regarded scoring with a hot space babe prior to real space babes subjugating the entirety of human civilization. I would note that her recent defeat has only made her more interested in securing that date. Not less, the alien pointed out. Of course, she's also going to be on latrine duty for the foreseeable future, so I wouldn't worry about her coming around for a rematch. Jason deliberately ignored that last comment. What did I get if I won? The perp shrugged. According to the Marine, you didn't say. Perhaps the joy of standing triumphant astride the defeated form of an alien oppressor? He winced even as part of his soul giggled at the prospect. Did I? She shrugged. You did, before stumbling off into the night. Fortunately, the individual who recorded the altercation didn't film you posing atop the Marine after your victory. Her smile turned distinctly plastic. I imagine if they had, we would be having a very different conversation right now. That small part of him that had been congratulating himself died a quick and ignoble death as it was drowned by the sudden reminder of the reality of his situation. Right, he said, nervously straightening out his bathrobe, which in turn reminded him that he was having this very important conversation in a bathrobe. So as I said before, what happens now? A number of my superiors wanted you thrown in prison, she said casually. He swallowed, guts turning to ice water. Fortunately for you, my diminutive friend, as the woman on the ground, and thus nominally in charge of this district, the details of your punishment are up to me. She eyed him seriously. Make no mistake, prison's definitely still on the table here, but I loathe wasting talent. So, I magnanimously offer you an alternative. As she spoke, her fingers skittered across her data slate before she spun it around to face him. Jason stared down at the document displayed, surprised to see English text on it in addition to the runic symbols of the Shilvetai. He read it. Then he read it again in both languages. Then a third time just to be sure. You have to be joking, he said finally. I can assure you I'm not. You want me to join the Imperial military? He asked, trying to wrap his head around the concept. Since when did you guys even start accepting humans? Since next week, the alien said, taking back her omnipad rather brusquely. You really think anyone's going to go for it? He couldn't help but ask. I think we're both smart enough to know that given a large enough sample size, someone is going to be willing to sign on, she said. We don't expect many, but even a few will be a propaganda coup. Proof that humanity is being successfully integrated into the Imperium. He had nothing to say to that. She was right after all. She turned her attention back to him, the veritable alien tank of a woman almost looming over him. The concerns of the Imperium are ultimately irrelevant to you though. What is pressingly relevant is the possibility that by the time this conversation is through, you will either be a candidate for the Imperial Marines, or a man on trial for assaulting a member of the Imperial military. Jason found himself reaching up a hand to pinch his nose. Like that's any choice at all. No, it's not. The Marine gave him a toothy grin. Welcome to the Imperial Marines. Part of him was tempted to go to prison right then and there. Just to spite her. Unfortunately, he was intelligent enough to realize that futile acts of spite against an overwhelmingly powerful opposition were what landed him in this position in the first place. Damned if it wasn't tempting though.